legislation around equality, uh, and the Equalities Act was brought into, of course, to support minority groups, of which I am one, and I've tried benefited directly at times from the equality legislation. So, so, so is there a way that we could have, you know, have have proper democracy, but still maintain the rights of or the support for minority groups, or is it black and white? Can we only have one or the other?
That is a very interesting and very important question. You see, I think the device of rights always gets it wrong, providing rights are, if rights are not universal, if rights are group rights, then it seems to me to be the wrong instrument. That if you like, I mean, let's talk about, we've talked about one set, the rights of gender. That's supposed transsexuals, which I regard as a completely imaginary condition, as opposed to actual women. Those two rights are diametrically opposed to each other. If you classify them as rights, you see, this idea of government founded on the rights of different groups is a French Revolution idea. It was criticized, and the first proper declaration of the rights of man and the citizen is that's created by the French Constituent Assembly in the first years of the French Revolution. There is, by the way, no comparison whatever with the American Bill of Rights. The American Bill of Rights is simply a restatement of standard common law rights, with the addition, in the peculiar circumstances of the Revolution, of the right to what the First Amendment rights, which become the rights to freedom of speech, which were derived from the right of freedom of speech in Parliament in the English Bill of Rights of 1689, but were generalized. But they are general rights. The peculiarity of what the French did was to come up with sectional group rights. Now, within 5 years, there was a brilliant attack on this idea written by the great English, I suppose, jurist, legislator, Jeremy Bentham, extraordinary essay called Anarchical Fallacies, and it contains the famous phrase denouncing universal human rights as nonsense on stilts. And he also attacks he points out that rights doctrines are doctrines designed not to come up with a basis for human society, but to attack existing ones. If you look back to the American Revolution, the only time that you talk about universal rights in it is in the Declaration of Independence, when you are justifying breaking away from America. If you then follow through Bentham's arguments, he points out that rights doctrines set groups against each other. They are the worst possible way of reconciling differences in a society. Because if you say to people, you've got a right and you've got a right, well, what we see is the Miss Peggy case in Scotland. That's precisely what we see. This absolutely irreconcilable struggle that cannot be resolved. What we need instead, I think, and I'd like to discuss this with you, we need to return, as very deliberately the Trump government is doing in America, the Trump administration is doing in America. We need to return, or indeed, as Martin Luther King wanted. Martin Luther King did not want black rights. Martin Luther King wanted equality. And we need to return to that fundamental notion of equality before the law. And I don't think we need frankly, I don't think we need anything else. Because again, if you just look at the term disabled, let's look at the term, right? Let's look at the term that relates to you. Let's look at disabled rights. If you think about it, all that means, if you're to push it to the extreme, is your right as somebody who is disabled to put your hand into the pocket of somebody who is able to pay for special measures. Now, isn't that a method that is designed to produce conflict? In other words, it's very much like going back to what we were talking about, a single issue committee. These things are all the same. Government is about good government, like good human relations, like a good conversation like this, is about balance. It's about different ideas, different needs being balanced against each other. The great demand of government is balance, that there has to be a balance between what it would be nice and what can be afforded. And the rights doctrines is the worst possible way of going about that.
Yeah, you talk about disabled people putting their hands into other people's pockets, and then we mean the taxpayer. And when we're talking about the right to, the right to access goods and services, the right to use public transport, the right to access public buildings, public facility, I don't think. I'm not convinced that should be seen as a special privilege or a special assistance. It's it's something that I don't hope that in our society the state would be happy to support people to do that, because it's not an extra privilege. It's just.
Can I just put a case to you, that wonderful phrase that Thomas More always used in these matters? If we push that idea of absolute right of the disabled to enter everywhere, we now have developed, and I think many of us, as we get older, become very grateful for it. Let me be quite frank. Once upon a time, I would have laughed at the notion of needing a lift when I'm carrying luggage. I am now exceedingly grateful for it. But equally, think about it, David. If you carry your idea to its furthest extent, you would be saying that somebody who is bedridden has got the right to get on a bus. And that therefore we need not. Do you see the point that I'm making? That we need not simply wheelchair access, but ICU access. Do you see how? I think the idea of the right is a bad way of thinking about this, and it's the very fact you just produced that list shows how far. And again, you'll forgive me if I use a pejorative term. How far it's the idea of rights has infected our discussion of these points. Again, the question of children who have supposedly special needs. This becomes an absurdity if, again, using legally enforceable rights, for example, you decide that a child with ADHD or whatever it is has the right to have an individual taxi taking him or her to school at a cost of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. This is insane and is unsupportable. But if as I said, if you give people legally enforceable rights, if you create a series of idiotically drafted rules, if you set up a sympathetic tribunal, then you land yourself into this awful mess. And I'm afraid we are now, of course, getting to the point that we have a state that is so big that our shrinking economy, or rather, it is very nearly a shrinking economy, or a very, very slightly growing economy, cannot support it. So we're going to have, I think, as part of what I was talking about in our earlier discussion, we're going to need a fundamental reset and rethink. And there's another aspect that I want to talk about frankly with you. Although my own disability in comparison was very slight, it had a major impact on my own upbringing. I was born with club feet. I got polio very mildly, thank God, because I'm born in 45, long before there is the Salk vaccine. One of my feet, my right foot, corrected itself easily with the childhood surgery, which is little more, I think, than twisting the baby's foot back the right way around. But my left one,
The battle is
my left foot required radical surgery of the type which is now known as leg lengthening. It was going to be inches shorter than the other. And I had this extraordinarily ambitious operation in 1945, which involves breaking every bone below the knee and resetting. And so, I had that experience, and that experience of difference that it produces in the child, wearing surgical boots to begin with, then boots at a time when boys wore short trousers and shoes were getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. So you're marked out as being different. But what I think is the really important thing is and it goes very much with what you're doing with this podcast, it is to encourage independence and to avoid victimhood. I mean, one of the, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, I think one of the things that has been worst about the development of our culture since the 1960s has been this elevation of the idea of victimhood. It's something I passionately disapprove of. That each one of us has got talents, each one of us has got drawbacks. Each one of us has got deficiencies. Some of us have even, like me, have even got deplorable vices. But we're presented with this sort of mixture. And it seems to me we need a culture which encourages people to make the very best of what they've got. But this idea, that it's up to people to make the best of themselves seems to be one that we barely talk about anymore. I mean, don't you think that by doing what you're doing with this, and sorry, I don't want to sound too pious. I'm not famous for being pious, but you are setting a jolly good example. You're taking control, you're taking initiative, you're getting in touch with people like me, you're getting us to have a serious, all of this is terrific. And it's the absolute opposite of the passivity which I hate.